to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam in part 2 of the Star Wars Day celebration. Let's dive into it. So this morning we talked about the issues around Rey and Rey's characterization and, all that. Not so much the issues, but the willful ignorance around people who take issue with said aspect of her character. And about how if you watch the movie, it is everything that is kind of criticized is broadly explained. So, all that notwithstanding, here is what we are at now. Now, what we're going to address now is less the issues around that and more the broader issues that there are with this movie. Because, like I said this morning, when I saw the movie initially, I'm fairly certain I even said this in the review that Peter and I did almost 7 years ago now, 6.5 years ago, when the movie came out. When I saw the movie, I think I said something along the lines of, as soon as the Star Wars thing came on and the crawl started and it said Episode 7, The Force Awakens, and I was sitting there in the theater watching a Star Wars movie for the first time in 9 years, because 2006 would have been the last time. It is one of those things where I knew I was going to be unable to criticize the movie. And I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm seeing a Star Wars movie, a new Star Wars movie for the first time in a long time. This is going to be great. I'm so excited. So I see this movie, and, that's exactly what happened. And then I watched it, when it came out. I saw it in theaters, I want to say like 3 times. I saw it twice opening weekend. I went Thursday night for Beware of Spoilers, and then we went Saturday when I went home from college. Me and my dad and my brother went to see it, and then when I went back to Albany, I saw it in theaters a 3rd time because I had nothing to do, and I was like, fuck it, let me go to the movies. So, see the movie 3 times, and I, and every time, there was a little bit of diminishing returns, and I watched it a 4th time on DVD, and since then, I don't think I've sat down and watched the movie in its entirety until yesterday, when I sat down and watched the movie again. And ultimately the problem that I came up with watching the movie again, and this is 100% because we have the benefit of hindsight, where we can be like, oh, well, we know where this is going and what's happening. We can see what went wrong and where. It's easy to do a post-mortem now that we have the full sequel trilogy picture laid out in front of us. So looking at what went wrong, I think that number one, we get this issue where where the sequels are kind of dependent on, building a mystery. And I think that another thing that the sequels do that's kind of not great is they go out of their way to, not build, the movie goes out of its way to not explain to us enough about what's going on. Everyone has a secret past in this movie and has relationships with each other, except for none of it is explained to the viewer. And what is explained to the viewer is just enough to get people talking about the next movie, not about building the movie we have here. So, I don't think even in the expanded universe has the relationship that is established between Lars Santeca and what's his name? I forget his name. And Kylo Ren. Wow. I don't think that's even been established yet. Where it's what is that relationship that's been had? Is he someone from Alderaan who is an old friend of Bail Organa? What's going on there? And this idea that, and the Empire's back. It's well, I don't think the Empire necessarily needs to be back to be a credible threat to the galaxy. And then there's all these issues about the relationships that occur between the various, between, various entities in the show. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for the viewer, where it's like, well, like, my question is, if I'm watching the movie, and I am not someone who is, like, how do I put this? What's the word I'm looking for even? Like, I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, with all the nonsense regarding, the various, the Empire coming back. We don't necessarily need the Empire to be the threat. There's plenty of other threats. We have a galaxy full of threats out there. The Empire doesn't need to be it. And when you watch The Force Awakens, there is no indication anywhere in that movie that the Emperor is anywhere involved with any of this. There is no indication that Palpatine is still alive. There's no evidence that Palpatine has cloned himself. There's nothing to indicate that Rey is related to Palpatine. There's none of that. None of that anywhere in the movie. It's not established. It's not broadly explained. There's nothing even hinted at that. And whether or not people know about the quote-unquote the girl throughout the movie, she's referenced as the girl, and there seems to be this knowing thing among people that, oh, the girl on Jakku. But, even that doesn't quite mirror the original trilogy, where it's not like anyone knew that there was a boy on Tatooine who would be able to destroy the Emperor, where it's like, oh, we gotta be careful of him. And it wasn't until Episode 5 where it's like, oh, that's Anakin Skywalker's kid. And it wasn't, and then we find out that, it's Vader's kid. But if what they're going for is this idea that Rey is connected to the Emperor, it's not well laid out in this movie. It's not well. And I'm not saying you have to sit here and be like, oh, and it is Snoke's daughter. And the thing is, it's like, considering how she ends up on Jakku, and considering how, the Sith assassin is involved in that, I don't understand this world in which it's like, why is it that why was she put on Jakku? I don't think that's explained either, where it's like her parents wanted her to get away, but then why the Sith assassin who did that? And then if that's the case, why the secrecy? Why is catching her no longer priority one? Where it's like, if this is a rogue clone of the Emperor, and this rogue clone of the Emperor is out there and could do that, why is she not the top priority for capture? Okay, Luke is still out there, and they keep saying, oh, we need to get Luke before he does something ambiguous. And I think that, to an extent then, the way that they build Luke up in Episode 7 does lend credibility to Episode 8. And it makes Episode 8 work. Because the problem becomes where it's Luke, they build up where it's Luke, if Luke comes back, that'll be the end of us. If Luke comes back, where it's we have to stop him from doing that. And I think that Episode 8 really improves upon Episode 7 and has it work a little bit better. But ultimately the problem is, it doesn't, it's not enough. Not enough is done to establish it as a standalone title. And I don't understand why it's if I need to sit here and watch the sequel to get additional context and for things to work, the idea that Luke is going to come in and save the day against the army, and that's what he says, that's kind of what that feels like. That line gets that additional meaning having watched this movie again, where he's like, what am I going to do? Stare down the entire First Order with a laser sword? That feels like a jab at, the whole thing in Episode 7, where it's we need Luke, we need Luke, we need Luke. okay, but what do you need Luke, for? And then the whole thing where it's like, oh, well, there's the map of the galaxy that's missing one section, and that's the one that's in Octo, and it's like, well, what the fuck? Like, you couldn't, like, that. I remember laughing, like, in the theater after I saw that. I'm like, oh, you couldn't figure out where he was. There's a giant empty spot in the map. That'll isolate out where he is. Then, then isolate out planets that aren't, like, the whole thing's fucking stupid. So, it's one of those things where, looking at it now, and as a viewer, we can point to, we can point to the broad issues that arise from this movie. And it all comes down to one key thing with the sequel trilogy. There was no plan. There was no plan going in, and Bob Iger said as much in his book. He said, look, we were, to be able to sell the investment, the $4 billion to the investors, and the stockholders and the board of directors, we needed to have a quick return on investment. So the most important thing that happened when we bought Star Wars was that we had a movie coming out within 2 fiscal years. So they weren't concerned about making sure the trilogy made coherent sense. They just needed that movie to come out. Maybe what they should have done was make Rogue One or make a different movie in its stead, and then spend more time fleshing it out. But hindsight is 20/20 on that. And I feel like part of the problem that goes on with this is this idea that, like, oh, Luke shouldn't have been the sad sack in this. It's like, well, no, I think every decision that happens in The Last Jedi comes from not a clear guidance going into The Last Jedi. Where it's like, I'm telling you a story, and then I'm like, okay, and then here are where I'm leaving off all of these characters. And then we're going to, in the next one, just pick up where that happens. It's like, well, what of this? Like, how does this work? How do these two things fit together? And when the answer is they don't, like, we got to figure out where we go. And I've said it before, that what the sequels feel like is you have one guy who told the beginning of the story, then one guy sees where he left the pieces, picked up the story, and continued telling the story, and then the first guy comes back and goes, okay, well, most of that was bullshit. Forget most of that. We're going to go and, we're going to do something entirely different now. And it's like, well, fuck. Like, that's not how storytelling works. Why the fuck there's so much traffic right here? But it's one of those things where, like, we're going to look at this through this prism, and we're going to acknowledge what the fundamental problems are. It all comes down to lack of planning and having to make a movie that's going to gross $2 billion, that way they can start to get a return on investment. Which is why you end up with a product that is basically a carbon copy of A New Hope, because everyone loves that movie. And notwithstanding criticisms of Rey because it's a female protagonist and not and that's the thing too. Rewatching it, and then I lay out all the things that I pointed out in this morning's episode. I'm not going to rehash them again, but watching that movie now, like watching watching the Force Awakens and how everything kind of meshes or doesn't mesh together properly in that movie. Doing that now, you end up with this, you can look at it and you can say that, the criticisms of Rey are intentionally designed to not be, in good faith arguments. Because if you watch the movie, every complaint is invalid. Like, purely on the fact that, like, it's like, oh, she can fight all of a sudden. It's like she's right there and she can fight. And it's like, I think the fundamental, like, problem with that is because Luke didn't. But I laid it out this morning, it's like Luke was wealthier than Rey was at any given point in the Star Wars trilogy, or Star Wars saga. Luke always had more resources, and it was, it was not a scavenger. Rey was a scavenger. She was going through ships, digging up parts that would have value. Like, all of that stuff is important. So, watching this movie and looking at all of that's going on, it's kind of, it is kind of a weird kind of genesis point for a lot of the toxicity that we still see in the fandom. Where it's like, you can't even fucking, make a comment about The Mandalorian without someone being like, oh, and The Mandalorian's better than the sequels. It's like, well, okay. The sequels have their problems. But the problems that arise are not because they, made a female, made a woman the lead in the movie. It's not because they made the, what's it called? There was an Asian girl in the lead. It's not because there was a black guy in a lead role. Like, looking at Finn's, journey, alone, it makes no sense that he is, that the way that JJ ends him off. And the fact that JJ is the one who's not criticized for that, but Rian Johnson is ridiculous. Because it's like, here's the thing about Finn, okay? In the first movie, in The Force Awakens, Finn has an epiphany moment, be it through the Force or be it through, his lived experience. He has this moment where he sees he sees his friend die, and that breaks him out of his conditioning, and he is, he is put into, and he breaks away from the First Order, and he escapes with Finn. Throughout the entire movie, it's all about self-preservation. And it's, I'm no longer with the First Order, I'm not a hero, I'm not doing this to help, I'm doing this because it is the quickest way for me to get out of here and to be done. It's Han Solo's arc in A New Hope, where it's like, I'm not here to be a hero, I'm not here to help out the rebellion, I'm here to get paid. That's what I'm here to do. And that's what Finn's there to do, too, but not get paid. He's looking for safe passage somewhere far away where he can live out the rest of his life without having to deal with the First Order. Then he ends up getting slashed in the back by Kylo Ren, and he ends up in He ends up in the Bacta tank. So then in the next movie, he makes the conscious decision, really for the first time, to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. And it's not a self-preservation thing. I mean, yeah, to an extent there is, and to an extent he is kind of coerced by Rose, who's going to call him a deserter. But the idea that he makes that decision himself, when it gets down to the end of the fight and he's facing down against Phasma, that movie is fundamentally about Finn coming into his own and realizing his role in the universe. Yeah, he doesn't have the Force, but neither did Han Solo. He is there because there are good people who will do the right thing. And he is, he's facing down Phasma, and he comes up, and she calls him scum. He says rebel scum. That's him coming into his own in that role. And then him willing to sacrifice his life to stop the cannon, that is the moment of, that is the moment of, we are doing the right thing. And then in episode 9, he doesn't do anything for the entire fucking movie. I couldn't even tell you where he is. Oh no, he's on the Star Destroyer. And the problem with it is, they go out of their way multiple times during the course of this trilogy to point out that the First Order is abducting children. And it's and indoctrinating them. And a good amount of the time when they're on, I forgot the name of the world, Nikishi? I forgot the name of the world. It's something like that, I think. I don't know why that name... Kashimi. Kashimi is the name of the world. Where, what's her name? Zori Bliss lives there. And the little dude, Babu Freak. And when they're there, it's they're actively kidnapping people to throw onto the Star Destroyers. And it's the kind of thing where you lay it up and you're just setting up the picture and you're setting up what's going to happen next. And then they don't do what they're supposed to do with it. Where it's look, Finn was the person who broke the First Order's conditioning. He was the one who saw the right thing and then decided to, to not, to not continue down that path. That is fundamentally what he is doing in that, in that movie. And then we get to episode 9, it should be, the next logical step should be, he's there, and rather than doing this thing where they're blowing up these ships and just calling it a day, it's one of those things that's just kind of very uncomfortable about the, what's it called, about the sequels in general, is the disregard for the life of the stormtroopers when they're not clones, which is an easy way to explain it away in what's it called, when they die in the prequels, and in the original trilogy they are conscripts. I mean, they were clones temporarily when they were retconned, but they were willing conscripts, willing to die for the Empire. And I think the Bad Batch did a great job of explaining why they swapped from clones to willing conscripts. But I don't think that, the idea of having them be, what's it called? Having them go out of their way to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Abducted, indoctrinated, and even going out of the way to introduce more people who had broken away from it, and not just Finn. When we get to these, to these things where Finn's just massacring them, it's like, well, there are probably some willing conscripts in there, but they're brainwashed. There are a lot of people in there who are not willing conscripts. There's, like, I would say more than half, otherwise they wouldn't have the issues they have. And then it never really felt like a war either, for any of it, where it's like, what is the role of the Resistance in regard to all of this? Why is the Resistance a thing? Why is the Resistance a thing when there's a Grand Army of the Republic? Because that's another thing I caught in this movie, is that there is a New Republic army. And what the fuck are they doing to fight the First Order? Like, I don't know. The whole thing is kind of stupid. Like, there are a lot of problems with the sequels, and I feel like there's definitely ways that a lot of the issues could have been avoided, but for whatever reason, they just opted not to take those ideas. But yeah, I think that's enough for today for Star Wars. So we'll wrap up there for today with this nice 2-part episode. Tomorrow we will have Moon Knight, the finale, and the finale of The Girl from Plainville. And then, what's tomorrow? Tomorrow's Thursday? Oh, shit. Maybe The Girl from Plainville will have to wait. We may have 3 episodes tomorrow, because we also have Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And then, what's it called? And then Friday is The Flash. And Under the Banner of Heaven, or in the name of, whatever the fuck the name of that show is. So, until then, have a great rest of your week.